This election cycle has set itself up to be the most heated in a generation and is going to be hard to separate fact from fiction with all of the biased rhetoric coming from both sides. As college students, the future the next president creates will be one we will have to live in, so we should start educating ourselves now so that our voice can be really heard in November. As a student of political science, I have stockpiled research on the tax plans of both major party candidates to educate you on what both tax plans would really mean. The tax plans between the two candidates could not be more opposite, with one suggesting a complete overhaul of the present system and one suggesting only a few tweaks. Today I want to explain to you what a tax plan would look like under a Donald Trump presidency, which would rehaul the tax code completely, and then by contrast explain what a Hillary Clinton tax plan would look like, which keeps the tax code roughly the same while raising taxes on the very wealthy. Let's get started by looking at Donald Trump's tax plan. Donald Trump's tax plan proposes a complete overhaul of the present system and is at the very center of his presidential campaign. On his website, he lists 4 main goals for his tax code: tax relief for the middle class, making the tax code simpler, growing the economy, and doing all of this without increasing the federal debt. According to Donald Trump's campaign website, the current tax code would be reduced from its initial 7 brackets down to 4. To explain this simply, I'm going to just use the single people number. So a single person making under $25,000 in this tax plan would essentially pay no income taxes at all. And then single people making between $25,000 and $50,000 would pay 10%. People making between $50,000 and $150,000 would make 20%. And then anybody who makes more than $150,000 would pay 25%. This would essentially bring on the lowest tax rate we have seen since before World War II. Outside of income tax, Donald Trump's website highlights reducing corporate tax to 15%, where it currently resides at 35%. This, he claims, will make America a more desirable place to work because it will also be a cheaper place to work. He also vows to repeal the death tax, which essentially taxes people's money that has already been taxed through income taxes. Despite all of his tax cuts, Trump still claims he can be revenue neutral and not add to the debt. He claims he can pay for these tax cuts by just simply eliminating all of the tax loopholes that are available for corporations and the very rich. Now, a candidate can say essentially whatever they want you to believe on their website, so let's take a look at what a third party says about Donald Trump's tax plan. According to an analysis done by the Tax Policy Center, which is a nonpartisan research center located in D.C., Trump's tax plan would indeed cut taxes all across the board, but the people seeing the largest savings in both dollar signs and in percentages would be the wealthiest of people. In fact, a tax expert at Forbes magazine claims that people who make more than $3 million in a year could save millions in tax breaks. Over the next decade, the tax cuts would see federal revenue drop by $9.5 trillion, though this is before accounting for what kind of economic effect the tax cuts could have. The Tax Policy Center does agree that the plan definitely incentivizes more people to work and invest in America, but unless Donald Trump proposes more federal spending cuts, it would be impossible to avoid drastically increasing the federal debt under this plan. Now let's take a look at what Hillary Clinton's tax plan looks like. Hillary Clinton runs her campaign on continuing the legacy of President Obama, so she does not support as many tax changes as Donald Trump does. According to her website, Hillary would give families a tax break to help account for the rising costs of college. So a family would earn $2,500 in tax breaks for each student in that family. She also advocates for a tax credit given to companies that do profit sharing so that they are incentivized to give their employees a stake and thus a say in what their company is doing. Though Clinton's website does not go into any detail about what her actual income tax bracket would look like, the expert from Forbes did. Clinton does leave the tax bracket essentially exactly the same with only one exception. She adds an extra bracket on top of the original 7. And so where originally people making more than $400,000 in a year were paying 39.6%, she would add another bracket where people making more than $5 million in a year would essentially pay 43.6%. So she would not see much change under a Clinton tax policy for the majority of people. So for example, somebody making less than $25,000 in a year would pay $4 more in their federal income taxes. But as we get to the more wealthy people, somebody making around $700,000 a year could see their tax jump to nearly $80,000. The Tax Policy Center, which is the same nonpartisan research institution that I mentioned earlier, also did a report on the results of Hillary Clinton's tax policies. They claim that her tax proposal could see the federal revenue increase by $1.1 trillion in the next decade, again before counting for any changes in the economy that it could cause. They also agree that nearly all of the tax hikes would fall on the top 1%, while the bottom 95% would see very little to absolutely no change in their taxes. However, they do say that the tax plan makes a very complicated tax code even more complex, and that it reduces incentive to work and invest in America. So to close, let's compare the two plans. If Donald Trump wins the presidency, he would completely overhaul the tax system so that it's not only simpler, but so that people are paying a lot less. He claims he can do this simply by eliminating the loopholes, but the Tax Policy Center claims that even if he does this, we would see revenue fall by $9.5 trillion in the next decade. Hillary Clinton would keep the tax code roughly where it is, except for adding that extra bracket on top where people making more than $5 million would pay an extra 4%. Our revenue would grow by $1.1 trillion in the next decade, all with only having tax hikes on the top 1%. However, it is largely speculated that these tax hikes could have a negative effect on the economy. I hope in the last few minutes I've helped to educate you on the two different directions our taxes could take come November. Thanks for listening.